the secret militant group behind San Francisco's deadliest killing spree, the city that stopped breathing. Subscribe if you dare to hear the truth they tried to bury. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It streaked down the cracked windows of the San Francisco Police Department like tears on a face too exhausted to cry anymore. Outside, the city moved in hushed tones, sirens in the distance, whispers in corner bars, and the steady heartbeat of fear pulsing through every empty street. It was April 1974, but San Francisco felt like a war zone. Random people were being gunned down. No pattern, no warning, no mercy. Young, old, male, female. If you were white, you could be next. Detective Frank Delaney stood over the latest victim, a 42-year-old accountant named Gregory Miles, found slumped against his car door in the Mission District. The man's groceries still lay scattered across the sidewalk. Oranges, milk, a loaf of bread. One bullet to the neck. No robbery, no struggle. Frank's partner, Detective Laura Cortez, looked at the scene and shook her head. "That's 6 this month," she muttered. 6 random, Frank corrected. 6 connected. They both knew what was coming. The headlines, the panic, the protests. The media had already started calling the killings zebra murders, a name that clawed at the city's conscience. At the morgue, the pathologist confirmed what they feared. Same caliber, same weapon, same cold precision. As Frank drove back through Market Street, the radio played the mayor's trembling voice urging calm. But calm was gone. Families barricaded themselves inside their homes. Taxi drivers refused to work after dark. The city's famous nightlife was dead. At the center of it all was one question no one could answer. Why? 3 days later, another shooting. This time, a young college student. Same weapon, same randomness. Frank Waugh. And a faded photograph of a smiling man in uniform. A man later identified as Jameel Washington, a former security guard turned radical preacher. Pinned to the wall was a single handwritten note. "Purify the earth by fire and bullet. The time of balance has come." The FBI joined the case the next morning. Agents believed the suspects were part of a secret faction calling themselves the Death Angels, a splinter group with apocalyptic beliefs, convinced that killing white people would bring divine reward. But there were no fingerprints, no clear hierarchy, just a trail of terror. Frank and Laura spent weeks chasing shadows. Witnesses described men in dark coats, driving a white sedan, always calm, always silent, never stealing, never speaking, just executing and leaving. The city turned paranoid. White citizens were told to avoid walking alone. Police stopped hundreds of young black men, sometimes without reason, sparking outrage and protests. What began as fear now threatened to ignite racial war. Frank didn't care about politics. He wanted the shooters, whoever they were. Then came the call that changed everything. A man named Anthony Harris, claiming to be part of the group, walked into the police station trembling. He said he couldn't live with it anymore. "They think they're soldiers," he said, his voice shaking. "They meet in secret. They say God speaks through the barrel of a gun. But it's not God, it's madness." Frank and Laura exchanged glances. This was the first real break. Harris gave them names, locations, codes. He said they called their targets zebras, a twisted reference to their belief in cleansing impurity. But as he spoke, Frank noticed something off. Harris kept glancing at the clock, his knee bouncing nervously. "You're scared," Frank said. "Who are you scared of?" Harris looked up slowly. "You don't get it. They're watching." The hunters become the hunted. The photograph lay on Frank Delaney's desk like a threat carved in silence. Rain hammered against the window, washing the city in streaks of gray. San Francisco no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. "Someone got close enough to take that picture," Laura said, pacing behind him. "Too close. That means they knew where we were, Frank. They're watching us." Frank didn't respond right away. He kept staring at the image. The blurred outlines of their car, the red ink bleeding across the bottom. "We see you too. Whoever left this," he finally muttered, "wanted us to know we're next." Laura exhaled sharply. "Then we hit back first." But Frank wasn't so sure. The line between hunter and hunted was fading. Every time they got closer, the killers seemed to already be one step ahead. At 8 a.m., they met with Chief Reynolds and the FBI task force. The atmosphere in the room was pure tension. Cigarettes burning down to filters, folders stacked like evidence of failure. Agent Richard Mills, the FBI liaison, stood at the head of the table. "We've been mapping the shootings using the new database system," he said, pointing to a wall-sized city map pinned with red markers. "Every incident aligns with specific transit routes and public parks. They're mobile but strategic. They're not random anymore." Laura frowned. "You're saying they're planning their kills?" Mills nodded. "Exactly. They're hunting in patterns, not bursts. Someone's coordinating this." Frank leaned forward. "You think there's a leader?" Mills hesitated. "Not just one. A council." The room went still. The term sounded too organized, too deliberate, like something out of a militant manual. Reynolds slammed his palm on the table. "I don't care if it's a council or a choir. I want them found before another innocent dies." By noon, the police scanner crackled with another report. A shooting on Turk Street. Frank and Laura raced through traffic, the wail of sirens echoing through narrow alleys. When they arrived, paramedics were already covering the body. A young woman this time, 26 years old, shot once in the chest while walking home from work. Her purse lay untouched. Frank crouched beside the sheet. The asphalt still steamed from the rain. Then he saw it. A small black card, half-soaked, wedged beneath her shoe. He pulled it out carefully. No text, just that same black and white circle symbol. The zebra mark. Laura's voice trembled. "They're mocking us." Frank pocketed the card. "No, they're sending a message." Back at headquarters, forensic techs scanned the card for prints. Nothing. But under ultraviolet light, a faint pattern appeared. It wasn't random. It was coordinates. Laura typed them into the city database. The location blinked onto the map. Pier 78, an abandoned shipping dock on the waterfront. That night, Frank and Laura drove there in silence. The air smelled of salt and rust. The pier was long deserted, a relic from when San Francisco had been a bustling port city. They moved cautiously through the fog, flashlights slicing through the dark. Seagulls cried in the distance, but otherwise, silence. Inside the warehouse, dust coated everything. Then Laura froze. "Frank," she whispered. "Look." In the center of the floor sat a chair, metal, rusted, with thick ropes tied around its arms. And beside it, a tape recorder. Frank pressed play. The tape hissed before a low male voice began. "You have taken one of our brothers. You think you're close, but you're blind. We do not fear you. We see you. Balance must be restored." Then the sound of a gunshot, and the tape cut off. Laura's face went pale. "Is that a threat?" Frank shook his head slowly. "No, it's a countdown." The next morning, all hell broke loose. A coordinated series of shootings erupted across the city within 30 minutes. 3 victims, different districts, same weapon. Frank stood over the crime board, connecting red strings across photographs. "It's a distraction," he muttered. "They're spreading us thin." Laura pointed to one of the locations. "Look at this. The last shooting happened near the old church on Geary, the same church tied to Jamil Washington's old sermons." Frank's eyes narrowed. The preacher, Jamil Washington, the charismatic ex-security guard turned militant leader. The man whose photograph they'd found in the Fillmore hideout. They'd tried to trace him, but he'd vanished in 1972. Until now. That night, Frank met with one of Washington's former acquaintances, Harold Green, a quiet janitor who once attended his sermons. He called it the path of purity, Harold said. Said we'd been sleeping too long, that the only way to cleanse the earth was through balance. Balance, Frank repeated. Black and white, Harold replied. He said the world was divided, and it was our job to set it right, no matter the cost. Frank's stomach turned. Do you know where he is now? Harold hesitated, glancing around nervously. He used to hold private meetings at the shipyard. But if you go there, be careful. They don't forgive betrayal. That night, Frank and Laura drove back toward the docks. The streets were empty, fog curling like smoke around the lampposts. As they approached the gate, Frank noticed movement. 2 figures near a container yard, whispering. Then, the unmistakable click of a rifle bolt. Get down, he shouted. Bullets shattered the windshield. Frank and Laura ducked, returning fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the fog in bursts of orange. The air reeked of gunpowder and fear. One of the gunmen fell. The other fled into the dark. Frank chased him down a narrow path, breath ragged, heart pounding. The man stumbled, dropped his weapon and turned. Young, maybe 20. Don't move, Frank yelled. The moss froze, hands trembling. You don't understand, he whispered. We're chosen. Chosen for what? To finish what was started. Before Frank could move, the suspect reached for something inside his coat. A flash, not of metal, but paper. He tossed it into the air, dozens of leaflets scattering like ashes. Each one carried the same message. Balance demands blood. By the time Frank grabbed him, it was too late. The man's pulse was gone. A small vial of poison clenched in his hand. Laura arrived seconds later, panting. What happened? Frank looked down at the lifeless body. He'd rather die than talk. She knelt beside him, picking up one of the leaflets. This isn't a gang, she said quietly. It's a doctrine. The next day, reporters swarmed the precinct. The word terrorist hit headlines. The mayor demanded results. The city demanded justice. Frank hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph. We see you too. Then came a call from the forensics lab. The fingerprints from the poison vial matched someone unexpected. Not a suspect, not a random citizen, but a police officer, someone from their own department. Laura stared at the file, her voice barely a whisper. Frank, this print belongs to Officer Michael Reeves. Frank's hands clenched into fists. Reeves, one of their own. He'd worked on the case since the beginning, always volunteering for night patrols, always nearby. A chill ran through him as realization hit. If Reeves was involved, that meant the killers had an inside man, someone feeding them information, someone who knew everything. Frank stood slowly, looking out the window at the city lights below. They're not just watching us, he said. They're inside with us. And as he spoke, his phone buzzed. A message with no number attached. It contained just one image. A photograph of Officer Reeve, chin tied to a chair, blood on his shirt, eyes open in terror. And beneath it, the words, "He tried to betray the angels, judgment in the shadows." The photograph of Officer Reeves was like a bullet through the precinct. No timestamp, no location, just his lifeless eyes staring back, and the message that made Frank's blood run cold. He tried to betray the angels. Frank slammed the door to his office and threw the photo onto his desk. They knew about him, Laura. They knew he was feeding us intel, and they caught him before we even realized. Laura rubbed her temples. Exhaustion etched deep into her face. If they got Reeves, it means they're still watching everything we do. Someone's still leaking our moves. Inside the department, Frank said quietly. We've been hunting them, while they've been hunting us. The realization cut through the silence like a blade. Hours later, a new lead surfaced. The FBI traced the last phone ping from Reeves' badge to the Hunters Point shipyard, a maze of abandoned warehouses at the edge of the bay. It was the same area tied to Jamil Washington, the radical preacher who vanished 2 years before the killings began. Frank felt it in his gut. That's where it ends. They rolled out with a small tactical team just after midnight. The fog was thick enough to choke on, the air heavy with the smell of oil and salt water. Frank and Laura moved quietly through the darkness, flashlights off, guided only by the distant hum of the bay and the occasional groan of shifting metal. Then, a sound, a faint clink, chains. They followed it to a rusted warehouse marked with fading graffiti. The door was padlocked, but fresh tire tracks led straight to it. Laura nodded. They've been here tonight. Frank kicked the lock. The door swung open with a metallic screech. Inside was darkness, until a single bare bulb flickered to life. In the center of the floor sat a chair, and in that chair, bound by chains and wire, was Officer Reeves. His head slumped forward, Ward, chest unmoving. Laura's breath caught. "Oh my God!" Frank stepped closer, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. Reeves' eyes were open, but empty. On his chest, crudely carved into his uniform with something sharp, were 4 letters: Z-E-B-R-A. Pinned to his sleeve was a torn scrap of paper. Frank peeled it off carefully. Written in precise handwriting. He broke the code. Balance must be restored. Frank swallowed hard. They made an example out of him. Laura whispered, "Then we end this tonight." They searched the rest of the building, and that's when they found it. Hidden beneath a loose floor panel was a box filled with photographs, cassette tapes, and small black cards, the same ones left near the victims. Each photo showed surveillance shots of people who'd been killed. The victims were chosen, not random. And scribbled behind each image were notes in neat handwriting. Names, professions, daily routes, and chilling words like approved and unworthy. "This isn't chaos," Laura said, her voice trembling. "It's organized. It's a system." Frank flipped through the stack until one photo stopped him cold. A grainy shot of himself walking into his apartment. His name was written underneath. And next to it, the word pending. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Frank turned sharply. Shadows moved near the exit. 3 figures, faces hidden under dark hoods. "Drop your weapons!" Frank shouted, aiming his gun. No response. Only the whisper of one voice cutting through the air. "You were never meant to see this." Gunfire erupted. Bullets cracked through the air, shattering glass and slicing through the fog. The echo of metal on concrete drowned out the sound of the bay. Frank dove behind a crate, returning fire. Laura flanked right, catching one of the figures in her light beam. A young man with wild eyes and a calm, eerie smile. He raised his weapon. She fired first. The man dropped instantly. The others fled toward the back of the warehouse. Frank chased them down a corridor lined with broken windows. "Stop!" he yelled. "You can't outrun this!" But the leader, taller, wearing a worn leather coat, turned and aimed. The light caught his face for the first time. Frank froze. "Washington," he breathed. Jamil Washington smiled faintly. "Detective Delaney, I've heard your name whispered in fear. You've been trying to stop the balance." "There's no balance in slaughter," Frank growled. "You're murdering innocent people." Washington tilted his head, calm and collected. "Innocence is a word invented by those who've never suffered." He lowered his gun slightly. "You think I'm the devil, but I'm just the mirror. You just don't like what you see." Frank steadied his aim. "You killed your own man, Reeves. He believed in your cause." Washington's eyes flickered. Reeves forgot who he served. Every revolution demands sacrifice. Frank's patience snapped. You're not a revolutionary. You're a coward hiding behind scripture and smoke." The two men stood locked in silence, the hum of the bay outside the only sound between them. Then Washington smiled again. "Do it, detective. Prove you're no different than me." Laura appeared behind him, gun raised. "Frank!" Washington turned slightly, but it was enough. Frank fired. The echo thundered through the warehouse, and Jamil Washington crumpled to the ground, eyes wide. The faint trace of a smile still frozen on his lips. The raid uncovered what the city had feared: detailed plans, maps, and names of recruits. Over a dozen men were arrested that night. The next morning, the news broke: police and zebra killings, 4 leaders in custody. San Francisco exhaled for the first time in months. But the relief was uneasy. At headquarters, Laura watched reporters swarm outside. "We stopped them," she said softly. "It's over." Frank didn't answer. He was staring at a sealed evidence bag on his desk, the final cassette to